Hello, and welcome to my presentation of Preventable Deaths of the Mass Incarcerated. My name is Dave Mole, and I am happy to be bringing this very difficult topic to you today. I'd just like to start by thanking all of you for the past few weeks of this presentation or this course of Crim's 800. It has really been an eye opener for me. It's been very illuminative and helped me in my practice as an addiction counselor and as a mental health crisis outreach worker, many of the times working with those who are about to be incarcerated or those who are re-entering our community. So I just want to say thank you for that, and thank you to Dr. Bolden for that. So today I'd just like to start with this quote from Nelson Mandela, which I find to be very impactful. And I've experienced many times in my life. I first was engaged with the carceral state or those living in incarceration when I was living in Scotland at the University of Glasgow. I was having a great time, international, and I was inspired by, rather randomly, by a local nun to see the real side of Scotland. And what she meant by that was coming to volunteer at the local maximum security prison called Barlinnie, so HP Barlinnie, Her Majesty's Prison Barlinnie. I was shocked, terrified, mortified when I entered that prison, which was over 40% over capacity. There was organized crime. There was massive amounts of drug trafficking. There was sectarian and gang factions, again, that were running the prison. And for me, it was the first time that I really understood the significance of what incarceration means. And of course, this is where I also met people who were seriously considering ending their lives or um, in at high risk of homicide or murder and also overdose. So this quote simply says, "It is said that no one truly knows a nation until one has been inside its jails. A nation should not be judged by how it treats its highest citizens, but its lowest ones." I think today in a modern context, we have a tendency of looking at the light, bright moments of our society and are more willing to look away from situations such as the carceral state and in particular preventable deaths. I would like to start just from a trauma informed point of view. Just a disclaimer, this topic is rather difficult. I know it myself as a practitioner of crisis intervention, suicide prevention, and harm reduction for overdose. The data that I went through is it's still hard. So two resources here. The first on the left is a Canadian resource called Center of Addiction and Mental Health, based out of Toronto. They are our academic psychiatric uh, teaching hospital that has great resources. There's a crisis number there, a text number there, and their local website. And then on the right, I've listed the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention and also their national 800 number and also a text number. Suicide, preventable death, the stats will speak that have impacted all of our lives. So we all of us in this course, unfortunately, statistically, will either have had an occurrence in our life or had been in near proximity to these tragedies. So I just want to say there's some resources here. If at any point you feel stressed or triggered or in need of some support, there's some great resources there. So let's start. So what do we mean by preventable death from a suicide point of view? So suicide is a tragic and complex public health problem that impacts individuals, families, and communities. Tragically, about 800,000 people die by suicide every year. That's about one person every 40 seconds. It's really, really tragic, dynamic, and it's also impacting our community on multiple levels, psychologically, socially, spiritually. About 7 to 10 individuals are impacted by bereavement from one death by suicide. Overdoses. So, what do we mean by overdoses? Another aspect or avenue of preventable death. This is, and I'm giving you these statistics to speak to the crisis in our communities at large and how that could be related to the significant problem of preventable deaths in a prison setting. So, the U.S. recently this year tragically reached 100,000 deaths by preventable overdose. I'll just bring you to the statistic of Louisiana. You can see there on the bottom right. Unfortunately, it looks like Louisiana's overdose statistics have increased by about 52%, which again is very tragic. And that's in light of COVID. There's a lot of explanations for that, but those are just the stark numbers. So why are we here? How have we come to this point? And I think it's important to say, as we've been seeing every week, that the United States is, and Canada is very close behind. As you'll see the stats on the right, hopefully you can see them clear enough, that Canada is within the top 10 of most carcerally populated states. In the U.S., there's approximately 2 million people incarcerated, which has seen a 500% increase over the last 40 years. So there are a lot of people behind bars. Just wanted to quickly speak to this stat, which is who is behind bars and how long are they there. So there is clearly a racial reality to those who are incarcerated. Tragically, I'm seeing here in statistics I've read in the back, if you are a Latino man, it's a 1 in 6 chance that you will be um, the likelihood of imprisonment as a U.S. resident, 1 in 3 chance as a black man versus a 1 in 17 chance as a white man. So there is clearly a reality of inequity within the carceral state population. So let's get into the specific topic. So new data shows the record high deaths of people locked up in jail. So a record high amount of people dying in jail as jail populations have shifted towards smaller rural jails with a growing number of women. A lack of accountability and acknowledgement of women's unique disadvantages all but ensures more deaths. Here's a quick stat that I found staggering. So it would appear in the US that there's a downtrending in urban incarcerated settings, but there is an increase in rural settings. This is concerning due to lack of accountability, lack of standardization, lack of access to healthcare. There's just more risk surrounding rural prison landscapes care of this data, and that is equating to more deaths in rural prisons. Another interesting aspect of preventable deaths in the prison setting relates to time. And this is understandable from a mental health addiction crisis point of view. Obviously, you're entering into a tremendously dangerous world, but about 40% of inmate deaths in 2008 occurred within the first 7 days of admission, while another additional 15% of deaths occurred among inmates serving 6 months or more. This is really the point that I'd like to make this last sentence. As in past years, suicide was the single leading cause of death for people in jails, accounting for almost 30% of deaths. So, two really staggering pieces of information to consider there. One, about 55% of deaths occurring in a prison are happening within the first 6 months. And two, suicide is still the number one cause of death within a prison setting. So, this slide's very important for the questions I'm going to ask at the end. This is just a quick overview of days in prison and proximity to cause of death over a month. So you're seeing addiction, suicide, accident, homicide really is a high risk time for an individual entering into the prison system at those first few days. Understandably, they're entering into uh, a completely new landscape, one that I saw when I was in Scotland, one that I see every day when I work with inmates who are in our local detention center. Okay, so next slide. Preventable deaths of the mass incarcerated. So we saw those stats, generally speaking, about suicide and overdose in our community. How is that impacted within the prison setting? Well, everything is that much more real. So incarcerated men are 3 times more likely to die by suicide than other men in jail. Jailed women are 9 times more likely to die by suicide than other women. The stat here, so 2018 in federal and state prisons, a total of 4,500 prisoners took their own lives. This is an increase of 83% of prison deaths since we started tracking data around 2000 to 2001. So that is abhorrent and tragic, and the reality of what we're working with. The Bureau of Justice Statistics, which is a subdivision of the Department of Justice, and released a survey or a research paper in 2018, and it really looked at the mortality rate in local jails. This, for me, really speaks to the tragedy of what's happening here. So, the total deaths within the local proximity or the local stat was about 1,100 or 1,120. This was the highest number of deaths reported in local jails since the Bureau of Justice started in 2000. Again, suicide deaths, number one cause of death in the jail landscape. The number of deaths in local jails due to drug and alcohol intoxication has more than quadrupled since 2000. The final bit of information here, and again, this just holds my heart. This really, really, I had to step out when I read this, quite frankly, when I read this stat that similar to previous years, 3/4 of all inmates who died in local jails were unconvicted at the time of their death. So clearly they were awaiting trial. Just a few quick slides from the Bureau of Justice Statistics. On the left, number of deaths of local inmates and their cause of death. So you'll see that suicide is the number one there on the left. The slide on the right, figure 4, is an overview between adult U.S. residents and jail inmates. And you'll just see there the staggering difference between suicide for those who are not incarcerated versus those who are. Similarly, the Bureau of Justice deployed a survey, a statistical paper on state and federal prisons. Again, the numbers are quite shocking. Just the amount of increase in deaths has skyrocketed. I did find causes, unnatural causes, including suicide, homicide, drug or alcohol intoxication, and accidents account for 17% of deaths in the state prison. I found the stats a little bit more confusing, quite frankly, from a state and federal point of view rather than the jail population. But the number of state prisoners who committed suicide increased 20% from 2017 to 2018, which again is a staggering statistic. Okay, so we've had an overview of the problem of the situation, which is that preventable death in the prison setting in the carceral state is very significant. So people are dying quite significantly within the prison setting. So what do we do? So suicide prevention. This is a strategy that has been deployed for a number of years now within community mental health, within the addiction landscape, and it's something that reformers of the carceral state are looking for within the prison setting. So many inmates will show signs of distress, hint, or even openly state that they are having difficulty and that they are considering harming themselves. Facilities with sound suicide prevention policies, i.e., training, will be better equipped to meet the needs and prevent deaths. Transforming care. Okay, what do we mean by this? Well, we know that a lot of institutions are not equipped to deal with mental health or addiction. So, this is just an overview stating that incarcerated inmates not only possess and sell drugs, but they are also using them. Studies have demonstrated that drug treatment is a powerful tool in the war on drugs and all types of correctional settings. So basically, if we are to provide more resources in the prison setting, that's going to reduce the amount of deaths by overdose. Okay, so preventing suicide and self-injury. Approaches and strategies to prevent self-injury and suicide in prison have suggested widely across the criminal justice system. Teaching programs like dialectical behavioral therapy, which I teach, have had significant impacts. The levels of stress in custodial environments may also inhibit delivery of preventative treatment for self-injury and suicide. So there are issues with staff being burnt out, compassion fatigue, not having access to service, not being able to deliver service. So there are great research papers out there. There's great data to show that these preventable deaths can truly be prevented if the right resources are put in place. Okay, so we're just about at the end here. A lot of information, a lot of it's very stark, a lot of it's very real, a lot of it's very hard to consume. So, questions I have for you: do you think a national strategy for prison suicide prevention is needed? That would include training, access to adequate health care, which simply is not happening in many settings, diversion from jails and prisons when someone is seriously mentally ill. Do you think that a strategy is needed? Next question. Due to 50% of suicides occurring within the first 6 months of incarceration, how do you think the carceral state should approach this high risk time period? What do you think about that? And then finally, what resources do you think would benefit those at risk of suicide, overdose, or murder, I guess, but primarily suicide or overdose within the jail prison? Here are my resources. You can definitely send me a message if you have any questions. Again, everyone, thank you for taking the time to follow through on this presentation, and I wish you all the best. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to email me or reach out to me directly. Thanks a lot, and